Listen, I'm going to try to keep this short and sweet. I know a lot of you have been waiting since the last ranking video, and even more of you have been waiting since the Goosebumps ranking video. Highly requested, long overdue, and yet, it's finally here. Haunting Hour premiered back in 2010 on the Hub channel, and in essence, it's a more modern, mature, and scary version of Goosebumps. I mean, plenty of episodes are legitimately scary even as an adult. But you'll see that soon enough, as I will be ranking every episode from worst to best. Now, just to set the record straight, there is a total of 76 episodes. However, I will be counting two-parters as one. Therefore, we'll be ranking a total of 70 episodes. Oh gee, wow, such a big difference. I know. However, that being said, sequel episodes do in fact exist within this series, but I will be counting them as completely separate entries. Only because sequel episodes usually come out seasons apart, and they only really carry over the central antagonists as opposed to the main cast. With the exception of one episode, but you'll see. And just to lay down some groundwork, the ranking criteria is pretty much the same as the last two videos. But just to reinstate, I'll be ranking these episodes on 3 categories. Number 1 being story and everything involved with that. So like characters, plot progression, themes, and so on and so on. 2 being scariness. Once again, this is children's horror we're talking about here, so everything will be assessed through that lens. And last but not least, the ending. Just like Goosebumps beforehand, Haunting Hour puts a lot of emphasis and weight on their shocking and/or twist endings. And as you'll soon find out, a lot of time these endings are pretty crucial to the overall story. Anyways, my friends, it's time. This is ranking every Haunting Hour episode from worst to best. Enjoy. Pouf de Fromage is the worst episode of Haunting Hour, and it's not even close. Quick litmus test to see if this episode will scare you. Does this scare you? No? Then brother, neither will this episode. You see, this episode centers around a family taking in a French foreign exchange student, and for the majority of the episode, it's just like, whoa, hey, look at the wacky French foreigner trying to adapt to the American lifestyle. And thank God they chose France to make fun of. France and Italy are like the two countries you can still openly make fun of. But nobody ever chooses Italy. But as it turns out, this French kid is actually an alien. He's not trying to take over the world, he's just trying to protect it from another invasive alien race. That alien race just so happens to look exactly like cheese puffs, so we get a final climax looking something like this. I'm pissing my pants as we speak. Now, I'm cool with wacky scenarios in children's horror, I really am. I think the difference comes down to tone. If this episode knew what it was and it was self-aware, they can almost lean into the schlockiness. And there is an episode later on that does this well. But this episode? Nah. It feels like a Disney Channel sitcom with its level of humor and acting. Some of these line deliveries sound exactly like Sky Jackson. So, yeah, it's the worst episode, no debate. Red Eye is baffling to me because obviously I consider it one of the worst episodes. However, this episode is amongst one of the highest rated episodes and cracks a couple top 10s. Then again, that's Screen Rant's opinion, and it's Screen Rant, so. But this episode is filled with some of the most laughably bad special effects. It's kind of crazy considering a majority of the series has decent enough CGI, for the most part. But one look at this episode, I mean, what are we doing, bruh? So this episode revolves around this girl whose dad is traveling around the world, sending home postcards on where he's been. I mean, the dad could just like call or text via the phone, but I guess it's the thought that counts. But slowly a ghost starts appearing in these photos, and it gets bigger and bigger and ooh. Yeah, It's not scary. The standard trope of the girl freaking out and nobody believing her occurs until her dad finally comes home, except, uh-oh, that dude is possessed by a ghost. And then the episode just ends. I know the whole sense of horror is supposed to come from this threat at a distance, slowly growing closer and closer. Meanwhile, there is nothing you can do to stop it. However, I don't know, man. This concept could have been done better. The only thing I liked about this episode is the relationship between the main character and the mailman. It was just really cute and wholesome. But that's about the only compliment I can give. Nightmare Inn has all the working parts to make a great episode, but ultimately doesn't pull it off. I think a lot of that boils down to the episode not really knowing what it wanted to be. The premise in the beginning suggests that the episode is going to be about nightmares. I mean, it's even in the title of the episode. But then the episode seemingly shifts focus onto ghosts and the paranormal before revealing, aha! We were a werewolf episode all along, which is fine. The whole werewolf stuff is clearly the major twist in the show, and all the paranormal ghost stuff is just a red herring. But it lacks focus, and the whole episode just seems ultimately sloppy because of it. The final twist is evident of that, as the main character throughout the entire episode is dealing with the death of her father, or rather the disappearance of her father, as a year prior his wrecked car was found but no body was ever recovered. Turns out, Dad's a werewolf, and he protects his daughter from afar. It's a twist that works, sure, but just feels a little rushed because of the episode's slow build-up. Intruders is just boring. There's no easier way to put it. I also think this is where some of my own biases get in the way because, as some of you know, I'm not a fan of fantasy horror. I just don't think these two genres necessarily mix well, for me at least. But even then, story-wise, there ain't much going on. The main character feels like she's not getting enough attention once her baby brother enters the picture. Meanwhile, a fairy in the backyard informs her that she's actually a changeling, and if she wants to be with her actual fairy family, she has to hand over her baby brother. Of course, that doesn't happen. Despite her bloodline, she finds the importance of a found family and yada yada yada. At the very least, I can give it to this episode for its message and theme, but everything else? Man, it's like walking through the mud. Even though it's not scary, the episode by all means should have a good amount of tension given the whole setup, but even then, it just doesn't. Ultimately, this episode just needed to place more emphasis on the central conflict for it to really work. My Robot is about an evil robot. Simple enough. Sounds like it could be good, but here's what the robot looks like. That is just a dude in a welding mask. Maybe I'm being too harsh. It's a show made for kids. The budget per episode is probably non-existent. However, this show usually is pretty good when it comes to production design, so I don't really know what happened here. Then again, this is one of the last episodes of season 3. The studio's wallet was probably running a little thin. Anyways, I only harped on about this for so long because when it comes to the story, this is probably one of the more simpler ones. Very plainly put, it's about an evil robot that does evil robot shit. That's really all there is to it. Of course it escalates over time, but the main problem is that it never gets to a point that I would like it to get to. Ironically, this is probably one of the most Goosebumps feeling episodes. It's over the top and silly, which could be fun, but ultimately it takes itself a little too seriously, specifically at the end. And the whole thing ends up tonally all over the place. The title alone should be reflective of the episode's quality, ARG V. If you haven't put the pieces together yet, the episode's about an RV. I am not joking. Specifically, a haunted RV. Yep, a family purchases an RV that a previous family died in. Only the daughter seems to notice all this spooky shit going on, and then they all go on a family trip and fucking die. I'm not kidding. They almost get into a car crash, but then look who's on the side of the road. It's the original family who died in the RV. Guess they all really did get in that car crash after all. It's honestly not a bad way to handle an ending like that. I mean, it is a little creepy. The problem really comes from everything before that. It's slow, it's boring, and it's not scary. I mean, come on, you can't make an RV scary. Oh no, the RV turned off the parking brake? Scary. Also, the parents were played a little too cartoonishly for my liking. They needed to tone it down a little bit. Bad Feng Shui is one of those episodes that I really do want to like. You know, a concept episode around Feng Shui, the traditional Chinese concept of arranging a room in certain ways in order to harmonize with its energy, is out there for an episode idea in terms of horror, but one that is uniquely interesting. And based off the title alone, going into the episode for the first time, I told myself that this was either going to be one of the best episodes or one of the worst. And seeing where this ended up ranking, you can tell which prediction came true. Really, this whole episode can be boiled down to evil Snake Man terrorizes local mother and daughter because the dresser cabinet was off-center by about 2 centimeters. I'm being hyperbolic, but I'm also not kidding. Also, this Snake Man, not too scary. The makeup isn't half bad, and it really works when it's obscured in shadows. But the episode likes to show this guy off in full lighting, which only ends up cheapening the effect. Also, the pacing is just terrible. It takes far too long to get things moving, and when they do, before you know it, the episode is over. With a title like The Dead Body, you expect this episode to be pretty fucking dark. Instead, we get some 1960s greaser ghost complete with some of the worst looking scary face morphs I've seen in a while. I mean, the old Damebo video had better effects. But the basic plot of this episode is that this main character teams up with this ghost kid from the 1960s who died in a fire to scare his bullies. After that, the ghost kid is like, what if I made you a ghost and I become real again? So he does that somehow. The thing that really hung me up about this episode is just how things work. Like, they don't establish any kind of rules for how anything works. There's a point in the episode where the main character somehow travels back in time and tries to save the ghost kid from dying. So not only is that not explained, but afterwards the main character is a ghost and the ghost kid is now real, but like, how though? The only saving grace of this episode is the pacing. Things happen rather fast, so I guess it doesn't matter if things don't make sense. The Hole is just a nothing episode. If anything, it's a very standard ghost story. A family moves into a new home, the house experiences a bunch of scary shit, and it turns out that the family who lived here previously were killed by their father via a car crash. Which, a little family murder-suicide is pretty dark for a kids episode, even if it's only heavily implied. Oh, yeah, and there's a hole in the backyard, which is like how the ghosts communicate to these kids? I don't know. Honestly, the whole thing is interesting because it seems like such an afterthought in the story. Like, oh man, we can't just make another haunted house story. Have a giant hole in the backyard. Fuck it. Who cares? Oh, and that ending. The dad gets sucked into the hole but emerges shortly after, with the hole closing up in its wake. Except the dad is now possessed by the dad that murdered their whole family. It doesn't really stick the landing, but I can at least see what they were going for. Bad Egg is a late season 3 episode, and I only point that out because, well, yeah, late season 3 episodes aren't that good. But also, this is an episode that is ultimately hindered by its lack of budget. In the episode, the government messes up and accidentally sends a bunch of homunculus eggs to a middle school, in which our main character is instructed to take care of said egg for some sort of home education class. Except, as expected, the egg hatches and hijinks ensues. However, it's all mundane and rather limiting in what happens. It's a lot of these kids just sneaking around the house trying to hide the fact that a homunculus creature is on the loose from their parents. I mean, even when the government rolls up on their house, disguised as pest control, it's still rather boring. just nothing really happens. A little creature running around the house is a simple plot that has proven to work. Look at E.T. or Gremlins or another episode in this very series I'll talk about later. It's a bit of a shame too, because I absolutely love this little creature design a lot. I just wish something would happen in this episode. The red dress feels a lot like an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, and by that I mean it's painfully below average. The first act is probably the best as it has all the elements of a good episode. It's got the classic creepy shop complete with a creepy blind shopkeeper who speaks rather cryptically about the objects she sells, but after that, it's just standard locales. So the story sees the main character stealing this red dress, and for a good reason. It's $400 fucking dollars. But then, nothing happens, and nothing continues to happen. She goes to return it at one point, but then she gets some call from a boy toy, and she's like, oh shit, I can get some good dick tonight. I'll return this tomorrow. And can I just say something real quick? I know nothing about dresses, but this dress, it doesn't look like anything special to me. Especially for $400. I mean, can't this girl just go to like JCPenney and find something similar for way less? Anyways, the whole thing ends with the main character losing her sight, and the shopkeeper no longer being blind. This is really a whole callback to the start when the shopkeeper says that customers pay in one way or another. And I get it, but like, the whole premise would work a lot better if the dress just like made the main character uglier over time, right? It would have tied into the episode's themes of vanity a little bit better and would have provided some really good body horror if done right, and would have actually given the episode an active through line. Also, one last thing I gotta talk about, this episode sees characters openly drinking alcohol. Like, usually these episodes revolve around kids, either from middle school or high school, but this episode I think centers around 20-somethings, and yeah, they're just sipping on some liquor. Granted, it's like pina coladas and what looks like wine. You could easily argue to the network censors that this is just like a smoothie or cranberry juice, but either way, I just found it a little interesting. If you saw my Goosebumps ranking video, you would know I'm not a fan of mummies when it comes to classic horror monsters. Plain and simple, I think mummies are cool, not scary. But even that aside, this episode doesn't really do a whole lot. I'm coming to the realization that a lot of bad Haunted Hour episodes are primarily bad because of the slow pacing. Case in point, Night of the Mummy. Nothing really happens until the very end. Well, I gotta admit, the start of the episode probably has one of the best on-screen kills in the whole series. Why the fuck is that so brutal? But outside of that, it's just a kid realizing that he's a mummy and he rejoins his family or whatever. I don't really care. The only claim to fame is that this episode has motherfucking Greg Heffley as the main character. Other than that, there's really no reason to watch this episode. My Sister the Witch revolves around this kid's sister who, is a witch. I mean, it's right there in the title. This is one of those episodes that I would classify as having more of a focus on fun and adventure rather than being scary, which is totally fine. However, I feel like this episode doesn't take enough advantage of the concept. So, yeah, the main character's sister returns from boarding school, but she's acting a little strange. No surprise, she's a witch now. And for half the episode, she's built up to be the villain, before it's revealed that all her witchy antics were just her trying to protect the family. As the actual evil witch, or I guess warlock, is this Boy Scout leader who is barely in the intro of the episode and then comes out at the end and is like, haha, fuck you, before ultimately getting turned into a frog. Now, I don't mind the mid-episode twist of the sister being good. In fact, I really like it. However, this antagonist could have had a more foreboding presence throughout the episode. Funnily enough, despite his little screen time, it is rather obvious that he is the evil one behind everything. I'm just saying, a more persistent threat would have done wonders. Really, just anything to see more witchy magic stuff, because this episode is somehow about witches and magic, and yet, we don't see a lot of that stuff. It has potential, is what I'm saying, and perhaps an episode later on will take advantage of that kind of stuff. Terrible Love is a story you've probably seen a million different times. It's a classic be careful what you wish for romantic kind of story. See if this plot rings any bells. A girl gets Cupid to make her crush fall in love with her. However, the guy falls madly in love with the main character and becomes clingy, creepy, and possessive. And that's the episode. By no means a bad premise. It's just something I've personally seen so many different times at this point that ultimately, the episode kinda hinders because of it. That being said, giving the episode its flowers, the action from the guy is realistically creepy. Like the one guy who constantly hits on the girl at the gym just trying to desperately get through her set, and that's it. Homeboy can't take a hint. Oh yeah, and the episode ends with the nerdy character making the main character fall in love with him. So yeah, I guess that answers the age-old question of how do Discord mods get girlfriends? But really funny fucking joke you wrote in there, Colin. Headshot is an episode that is weighed down significantly by its special effects. I mean, just look at this. Is this scary? Yeah, no, it's not. You see, this story is about a girl trying to make it in the fashion model industry. However, with every picture taken, her youthfulness is slowly being drained, represented by the picture that slowly gets uglier and uglier the more she keeps doing this. However, the makeup just isn't good. The first time the whole scenario is introduced, I thought the makeup was supposed to look cheesy and bad, like on purpose. And throughout the episode, it would start to look more and more realistic and grotesque. But, no. That's just how the makeup looks. Which I don't understand because the last shot, yeah, that's right, not the last scene, but the last shot, has this truly horrific face prosthetic. And there's another part in the episode where some girl has an allergic reaction due to sabotage, and those makeup effects also look great. It's just a shame because the rest of the episode is slightly above average, and if that makeup was on point, we could have had a pretty decent episode on our hands. Worry Dolls is yet again another be careful what you wish for episode, except maybe a bit more literal, as in this episode these Worry Dolls grant wishes, and of course, as per usual, the wishes go awry. Like how the kids wish they didn't have a nanny anymore, so she just completely disappears, or how they wish they could spend more time as a family, since the parents are constantly traveling and whatnot. Except their parents now won't let them do anything without them in a very creepy fashion, or how, oh, wait. There's no more wishes. That's right, a Be Careful You Wish For episode where only 2 wishes are made. Great. And I wish, they made at least one more wish. You know? Complete the mantra of 3 wishes. But, whatever. What we get is alright. I do like how the parents slowly become more and more eerie. I think the main problem is the amount of setup needed to get to this point. It feels like more of the episode is setting up the kids and the parents and their whole dichotomy and disdain, but also setting up the nanny and the kids and their relationship, but then also setting up the Worry Dolls and slowly letting them be incorporated into the narrative. Despite the simple premise, there's a lot of moving parts that overcomplicate the story and really could have been trimmed down. The girl in the painting is the perfect campfire ghost story. That is to say, its repetitive formula doesn't translate well when stretched out to a 20-minute episode. Truly, this episode would work a lot better in a 5-7 minute short. But this is network television, baby. It follows the basic beats that any campfire story would follow, as in a girl finds a painting of a picture that slowly over the course of a couple days changes. Meanwhile, the main character becomes more and more obsessed with the painting, mainly wishing that she could live in its world. And, well, she gets that wish granted as she magically is transported into the painting's world just in time for dinner. Yep, it was all bait to feed this giant fucking dog. And dude, I'm not proud of it, but when I watched this scene for the first time, I kind of popped off with excitement. It was funny and terrifying at the same time, and I absolutely loved it. However, as I stated before, this episode's pacing is rather repetitive and ultimately the main problem with the episode. Okay, so check this out. This kid likes to draw, and like any kid that draws, he has his very own OC. Okay, yeah, pretty standard stuff. Like, is his OC like a superhero or like like a Sonic OC or something like that? How about an old lady called Mrs. Worthington? Excuse me, what? Yeah, I didn't stutter. This fucking kid likes to draw this old lady and then complain to said drawing about how mean his sister is and how she needs to be punished. Well, this OC comes to life and proceeds to punish said sister in various different messed up ways. It's essentially a scary Mary Poppins is what they're trying to go for here, and it kind of achieves that. I think the episode needed some more whimsy, or rather distorted whimsy, to fully achieve this effect. But for what it is, it's done well enough. I also feel like they could have pushed the disturbing elements just a little bit more. Then again, I can't hate. The actress for Mrs. Worthington won a fucking Emmy for her performance. I'm not joking, by the way, you can look that up. We continue the trend of be careful what you wish for stories being below average with lots of luck. Truthfully, this one only ranks above the others solely because it's fast and snappy. This episode doesn't fuck around. Here's the main characters, here's the leprechaun villain, setup, rising action, climax, resolution, bing bang bop, it's done. It's nothing special, but it's quick, and being the third to last episode of the entire series, after a giant binge watch, I was thankful for its existence. Long Live Rock and Roll sees what is essentially the devil selling instruments to various different members of this band. The instruments make these guys sound amazing, at the cost of their soul. Ooh. Yeah, who could have saw that coming? I mean, yeah, it's a pretty classic story. I mean, you can experience the entire story through the song via The Devil Went Down to Georgia, because that's essentially what this is. And it's not bad per se, it's just very standard. You know, just another stone in the river. Not much to say here. Brush with Madness is notable to feature a full-on furry in a fursuit in the first 30 seconds of the episode. I mean, dude, it's literally the first thing I wrote in my notes for this episode. But this episode is probably the most dated out of all the Haunting Hour episodes. I mean, the whole series just oozes early 2010s, if you couldn't tell by the fashion already. However, seeing as this episode centers around two geeky teens, oh boy, is the dialogue ever so special.
You throwing up all over Carrie Fisher? Probably not how she thought her autograph signing would go.
Brett, do you know how epic this is? It's like, wow, level 365 gear epic.
Remember the last time you got this worked up at Comic-Con 09? More like VomitCon 09.
Yeah, the girl lead specifically has some pretty horrific lines, and her delivery doesn't make them any better. That being said, it's kind of nostalgic. Anyways, the episode centers around a kid stealing some famous comic book artist brushes, and these brushes end up painting the future where these two end up being stalked by some shadowy figure. And I'm not gonna lie, the ending, I don't quite understand it. Okay, look, so the kids get captured by this shadowy guy, and it's like, oh, okay, they're dead, cool. But then it's revealed that everything we've been watching so far was just the comic book artist drawing a comic, but then it's also heavily implied that his drawings become reality, but it's also implied that these kids are trapped in this comic, so like, I don't know. Maybe I just missed something. Perhaps the furry at the start and the immediately cringy dialogue short-circuited my brain from the start, but I digress. In the end, it's a bad episode that probably should rank lower, but at least for me, it's one of those episodes that are so bad it's fun. Black Mask is a pseudo time travel episode that will constantly have you asking questions, wondering how exactly all this is going to play out, until the very end when everything clicks. I will say, this episode effectively tricked me. That being said, it's not the hardest thing to do in the world. I am dumb after all, but still. You see, these kids go into this house and find a black mask. Upon wearing the mask, it'll show them a vision of seemingly the past. In the past, two kids are seen in old-timey attire playing in the basement, and then suddenly the furnace explodes, the ceiling collapses, and the kids die. One kid out of the three is like, damn, that sucks. Y'all want to go play some Halo or like go to the mall? Meanwhile, the other two feel like they can help out the other people in the past. After some trial and error, they figure out that they had to recreate the vision so that they could possibly time travel. I don't exactly see the steps to get to that leap in logic, but fuck it, we ball. And you see? The mask wasn't showing the past, it was showing the future. They could have figured that out on their own though. Yeah, I don't know what it is, but whenever these characters put on the masks, they only kept it on for like 5 seconds max before frantically taking it off. Like, I don't know, dude, if you just kept the mask on for a bit longer, you could have seen that these kids are you, but that's just me. But yeah, I like how the episode had me constantly guessing what's going on before actually buying into the twist at the end. That being said, it's pretty boring. Toy Train has one of the top 5 most emotional endings in the entire series. Which is a shame considering everything beforehand is really bland. Yeah, like, okay. In this episode, when this father was a kid, he ended up playing on the railroad tracks, and a conductor ended up saving his life at the cost of his own life. So all these years later, the dad has always felt guilty for this man's death, and has always blamed himself. Well, in the end, the dad reconnects with the ghost of that man, and they talk it out. And it's really emotional, and it's really good, but everything else is completely forgettable. Like, the dad's son ends up playing on the very same tracks and even runs into a younger version of his dad, don't question it, and they go through the whole situation of events together, or whatever. It's very forgettable, but the ending is so damn good, I tried to rank it as high as I could because of it. Fear Never Knocks has such a brilliant concept, I wish they just expanded upon a little more, or had a little more fun with. Because in this episode, these kids' grandpa is a famous therapist that helps patients conquer their fears. In reality, he just makes them talk into this recording device, and the said device physically sucks up their fears. Meaning, this tape recorder has pretty much every fear known to man in it. And when the kids start messing around with it, oh man, shit gets wild. Is what I would say if shit did indeed get wild. In fact, shit is pretty tame. The fears that come out of the box, it's just a crazy lady and like some dogs. Sure, decent scary things that work for children's horror, but only 2? Come on. It almost doesn't matter though, because fear itself rolls up and oh man, this is a genuinely creepy performance. It borderlines on being over the top and cartoony, and yet still remains eerie and unsettling. Unfortunately, he's taken care of quite easily though. The main character is just like, I'm scared of fear, and then homeboy gets sucked up like it's Luigi's Mansion. I think this episode should have either doubled down on the fear character, given how good his performance was, or have more of an emphasis on all the fears leaking out of the recording device. I mean, outside of the 2 already mentioned fears, we get a glimpse at a spider and like like a phone melts or something. I don't know. Out of all the sequel episodes this show has, I'm surprised they never returned to this one, because I really do think they have a great concept on their hands. Pool Shark is an episode that lacks any semblance of horror, and yet it's fun. So who cares? Basically, this kid works at his family's recreation center and starts freaking out when he sees a shark in the indoor pool. Now, this plays out as expected, as in nobody believes him. However, his dad is rather sympathetic, because as it turns out, this kid had a traumatic experience with a shark when he was younger. So it's almost like the dad understands that his son is going through some sort of PTSD, which ultimately begs the question, why the hell does he keep making him work the pool then? Well, we find out at the end that the whole family bloodline can just turn into sharks. And the visions this kid was seeing was just him awakening his own abilities. I'm not joking. Of course, there's a bully character throughout the episode and a love interest that all accumulates at the end when he shows up the bully in a shark form and wins the girl over. Cause I guess homegirl's into that freak shit. Like I said, it's not very scary, but it's a lot of fun, and the pacing never really leaves a dull moment. It pains me not to be able to put this episode any higher. The great talent of Tom Kenny can only carry this episode so far, but Uncle Howie ultimately falls a little flat for me because its failure to capitalize on its central premise. You can sort of see a running trend with these mid-ranked episodes so far. Because a wacky, zany children's show host talking directly through the TV and later manifesting into reality to terrorize the main character is fantastic. Sign me up for that. Then throw in the likes of Tom Kenny, who not only has the perfect voice for this role, but also has the perfect physical acting chops to boot. I mean, how is this episode not in the top 20? Well, nothing kind of happens. The main character gets trapped in the TV at the end and is turned to a marionette, which is actually pretty chilling, but everything else is just these characters standing around talking, which, given the premise of a children's TV program come to life, you expect a blend of Looney Tunes shenanigans mixed with horror, but we don't really get that, unfortunately. This is also the very last episode of season 3, so undoubtedly they probably had to keep this one rather tame, which is unfortunate because the idea and talent are perfect for each other. I think Lovecraft's Woods is the gold standard for average episodes of Haunting Hour. If a friend wanted to check out the series and ask what a general episode was like, I would unironically point to this episode. It's an episode that doesn't do anything bad, but it also doesn't do anything particularly good either. Which is not a good thing or a bad thing, it's just a thing. The story is just a bunch of kids being lost in the woods, and yeah, there's a deeper level to it. As it turns out, they've been lost in the woods for longer than they think, but the woods routinely wipes their memories, basically starting the whole cycle over again, but per usual, that's revealed at the end. The episode really is just kids lost in the woods. It kind of plays out like a PG Blair Witch Project minus the found footage aspect. But the dialogue between the characters is good, and I particularly like the lighting in the episode quite a bit. Also, a large majority of Haunting Hour episodes take place in the suburbs, like really nice suburbs. These kids be living in big ass houses. So it's nice to finally see a completely different setting for once. So yeah, Lovecraft's Woods, in some weird sort of way, is a quintessential episode, despite kind of ranking in the middle. Do you guys know the story of La Llorona? It's a Mexican folklore, urban legend kind of story. Well, this episode, The Weeping Woman, is just a modernized retelling of that story. If it wasn't already obvious enough. I mean, La Llorona literally translates to the weeping woman. And I don't have a problem with that. I think it's kind of cool when Haunting Hour takes classic urban legends and makes episodes out of them. It exposes kids to these classics if they weren't already aware. But the problem in this episode is the pacing. And no, it's not because it's too slow. It's actually a bit too fast. Some scenes don't get the emotional attention that I think they needed to really resonate. This episode, I think, would have been greatly beneficial if it was a two-parter. Not to spoil what's up ahead, but there's another episode about a classic urban legend that is a two-parter, and greatly benefits from the additional length. That being said, this episode is solid overall. Game Over is an episode I thought I would hate, but I ended up having way too much fun with it. I mean, look at this footage. This looks bad, but a level of bad that I can't help but to love. This is a video game centric episode, which are always a personal favorite of mine when it comes to kid shows, cause either the writers don't know shit about modern video games, or they can't get the licensing rights to anything, so everything has to be vague in general, and it ends up looking tacky because of it. But I don't give a fuck. This is the kind of stuff I live for. So, what's up with this episode? Is it like a creepypasta or something? Like a haunted video game? No, actually some kids are good at a particular video game and they get invited to be beta testers on a new unreleased game. The kids end up being transported into the game itself and it just becomes a zombie episode. The video game component to it all kind of takes a backseat. I mean, they have these shitty health bar overlays, but that's really their only attempt at making it feel like a video game. And that's really my main complaint. Because as a zombie episode, it's a fun time for a kid show. But they keep trying to shoehorn in these video game elements that just feel kind of tacked on. I think more commitment to blending these two ideas together would have worked wonders. But for what it is, it's a solid fun time. My imaginary friend is almost impactful if the twist wasn't so obvious. And I hate saying that, because an episode shouldn't be ranked higher or lower based off of the twist's predictability. But not only does this episode's emotional climax heavily rely on the twist, but the episode foreshadows the ending pretty fucking heavily. See if you can guess it. So, this episode's main character has an imaginary friend that only he can see. However, this imaginary friend is not the best influence. And the older brother character doesn't like him and constantly tells the main character to stop this imaginary friend shit, but the main character is reluctant. The two brothers fight and eventually the older brother can now somehow see the imaginary friend. And then these two start fighting, with somehow the imaginary friend being able to physically harm the older brother. Okay, 5 seconds on the clock, see if you can guess the twist ending. And yep, that's right. The older brother is also an imaginary friend. This twist is even more obvious if you actually watch the episode. No character outside the main character even acknowledged the older brother. It's a twist so obvious, the show should have just revealed it halfway through the episode, and then it could have more of an emphasis on this idea. Cause when these two say goodbye to each other, fuck dude, it's a great scene. Doubly so if any of you guys out there have brothers. But that should have been the focus. I don't care about these two fighting in a barn. And Haunting Hour does in fact do this from time to time. They build up something like it's going to be the big end twist, only to reveal their hand halfway through the episode and then focus on something completely different and more emotional. No spoilers or anything, but an episode in the top 5 ranking does this beautifully. And I just wish this episode truly knew the gem they had on their hands. This is probably going to be the shortest I'll talk about an episode because there's really not a lot here. I mean, hell, my notes for this episode just read, kid holds seance, shit gets spooky, very standard story done decently well. I'm not joking, but yeah, that's what happens. Kids hold a seance, shit gets spooky, very standard story done decently well. That's all I gotta say. Next one, I guess. Dead Bodies is the first sequel episode we talk about, and hey, it's better than the first episode, The Dead Body. Which I think this is the only sequel episode that I liked better than the original episode. Which ultimately isn't saying much. The first episode ranked 63, but I'm giving the flowers what they're due. But this is also the only Haunting Hour sequel episode where the main characters are fully back, and because of that, it feels a lot more like a two-parter than a sequel episode. But I'm still ranking them separately. The Dead Body was a season 1 episode, and Dead Bodies didn't come out until season 3. But this episode offers a nice role reversal, picking up where the first episode left off. The main character is now the ghost, and the leather jacket kid is a full-on living person now. However, his body starts slowly rotting, and so he plots to kill this girl to get more life juice or whatever. The leather jacket kid ends up dying in a pretty gruesome scene, and the main character becomes alive again. I think this episode works better, unlike the first episode, because the rules are clearly defined. I mean, literal higher beings come down and are like, hey, here's the fucking rules, and here's how it works. Also, there's a nice ticking clock element with the whole rotting body thing, that not only adds a nice level of suspense, but a nice level of body horror too. Overall, it's a fantastic sequel, improving a lot of complaints I had with the original, but in the grand scheme of things, it's just a decent episode. I kinda like the format Grandpa's Glasses has going on. On one end, you got this kid going through the typical scary ghost stuff, which, if I'm being honest, doesn't look that great. But on the other end, you have this mother going through an emotional, psychological battle, which you don't really see too much in this show. Haunting Hour primarily focuses on kids, and sure, the parents are a part of some stories, and they too can even get their own spotlight, but oftentimes it's like a really brief and quick scene that is easily glossed over, with the only exception so far I think being Toy Train. But in this episode, it's equal parts kid and equal parts adult. And honestly, the kid stuff, easily the worst of the two. I mean, look at this. Yeah, that's not good. But meanwhile, this mother is not just mourning the death of her father, but struggling with the passing of this man who simply wasn't in her life. It's a different kind of grief, a more complex and nuanced emotion that is explored in a very mature manner. And this is simply beautiful to see in a children's show. And it just really makes me wish that the scary ghost shit was better. The Golem, much like La Llorona, is yet again another classic folklore tale told in a modern setting, this time showcasing the Jewish folklore of the same title, the Golem, which is a life form made of earth, said to be a rescuer of imperiled Jewish communities. This episode is notable as it is the first two-parter on this ranking, and because of that, the story lets these characters feel more fleshed out and real. It also lets the audience really soak in the atmosphere and setting of the episode. I mean, look at this old foreign village. This looks fantastic. And these flashbacks have a real cinematic flair to them. Once again, once Haunting Hour gets out of the suburbs, the production design becomes really top notch. I think the major problem with the episode is just its climax. It leaves a lot to be desired. And that's really only the case because the rest of the episode is constantly building and building to something that is never really delivered on. The tension at the very start felt a little similar to something else. There's an episode of Nightmare Room, R.L. Stine's other show that came out, that actually has a really similar premise that I made a video on about. If you wanna check that out, you don't gotta, but I'm just saying it'd be kind of cool if you checked it out. But I'll get back to the ranking. But shameless plug aside, very quickly this episode establishes that it is indeed very different. A bunch of kids end up in detention, but nobody even remembers why. Hell, nobody has ever even seen this one nerdy kid in the school at all. And before you even start jumping to conclusions about the twist ending, it reveals that all of these kids are in a coma of sorts. And they've all done misdeeds to an extent or another, which ultimately overlapped in the homecoming float crash. Hence, their shared coma. They all learn to forgive themselves and each other and end up changing the events from ever happening. And I gotta give the show credit, the episode really got my ass. I thought the easy twist would have been that this nerdy kid was just like a ghost or something, but no. Turns out he's sort of like a guardian angel just taking on the form of a child. And I love how the episode doesn't draw this out. They reveal this bombshell halfway through the episode. That way the other half is just these kids talking through their emotions and coming to terms with their ramifications. That being said, it's still really sloppy, and they really try to shoehorn in some rather cheesy scares here and there that I don't think were necessary. Okay, so this one's gonna be weird to talk about, because Return of Lily D is a sequel episode to the very first Haunting Hour episode called Really You. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, oh wait, when did you rank Really You? Well, that's just the thing, I haven't yet. That's why it's so hard to talk about this episode right now in this ranking. Well, to be a bit general, Really You is a much better episode, and while this episode by all means is solid, it's just a rehashing what the original episode did, but to a lesser extent. Because Really You had this whole other dynamic to its story that this episode just doesn't have. And well, you'll see what I mean later on. But this whole episode just feels like reheated seconds. It ain't bad, leftover Thanksgiving food still hits, but not compared to the spread on Thanksgiving Day. But for what it is, it's a decent scary doll episode that runs through the tropes already laid out beforehand. Coat Rat Cowboy is nothing too special, but yet again, the production design is immaculate here. Haunting Hour, please have more episodes take place outside of the burbs. Let your production designers cook! But long ago, a cowboy was hung from a tree, and years later, that very tree was turned into a coat rack, which ends up having the main characters face off against said cowboy as he has unfinished business and yada yada yada. It's a very standard story, but it's presented in a very visually stunning way. But yeah, that's all I really have to say. Goodwill Towards Men is a weird episode in the Haunting Hour catalog. For one, it's the episode that feels the least like a Haunting Hour episode. We follow a rich family as they mistreat and discriminate against their hired gardener. I mean, the family ends up firing them on Christmas Eve nonetheless. But then magically the roles are reversed, and the rich family is now poor, living on the streets, realizing how good they had it. You know, a real Christmas Carol kind of episode. But it's strange, because the episode has the most tacked on horror element that it almost feels like an afterthought. Okay, so there's this ghost, who is in like one scene and that's it. I am not kidding. But the weirdest thing about this episode is that it's the very last episode of the entire show. I'm not joking, this is the note Haunting Hour goes out on. And I don't know if I was so elated finally being done watching the show, or if I found the drastically different story and tone refreshing, but in the end, I quite enjoyed this one. It's definitely the black sheep of the bunch, but I think that's what ultimately draws me in. Checking Out is another solid episode that is genuinely uneasy. This episode sees a family on vacation checking into a hotel. The hotel in question ends up throwing eyes wide shut parties for the adults. And really their whole purpose is to rid the parents of the burden of raising their teenage kids. We see other parents at these parties elating how much better their life is without their own kids, which is pretty morbid, the lack of care they showcase when talking about these scenarios. I love it. Of course, the main family is built different and ultimately keep their kids and whatnot, which is kind of crazy, because at least for the first act, these kids are quite possibly the most insufferably written characters in the entire show.
This isn't a vacation, it's a concentration camp.
This isn't a vacation, it's a concentration camp is a crazy line to have. And here's the thing, I know teenagers can be hyperbolic like this. Hell, I probably was when I was a teenager. But fact of the matter is, this is still a kid's show, and I kind of can't believe they got away with that line. I think the ending leaves much to be desired, however. The whole power of family love saves the day, and everything just kind of disappears and goes back to normal. It's a little too cut and dry for a Haunting Hour episode for my liking. I'm Not Martin is hilariously dark and disturbing. Usually dark humor in children's horror doesn't work. Either they conform to the two extremes but never truly blend them together. What I mean by that is usually episodes either double down on the comedy, making the horror aspects non-existent, or they go all in on the horror and lightly pepper in jokes here and there that feel more out of place than anything. But this episode does a beautiful job of incorporating both. Now, I'm not gonna lie, it's not the most hysterical jokes or the scariest storyline out there, but it's more than enough in both aspects. This episode sees the main character staying the night at the hospital to get his tonsils removed. But before his family leaves, the older brother acts like a typical older brother. And by that, I mean he tells a scary story to freak him out. The story is about Martin, a kid who was going to get his leg amputated, but ended up switching his charts with another random patient, and now that poor bastard gets his leg wrongfully amputated instead, all while yelling out that he's not Martin. Now, it would be easy to joke about how poor medical practices were back in the 1940s or 50s, but the episode already does that in spades, as the main character ends up awakening in the 1950s and everyone thinks he's Martin and that his leg has to come off. So we get a bunch of genuinely creepy moments and some brutally dark and funny jokes about how bad hospitals were back then. This main doctor is played beautifully. Whoever this actor is, dude, props to him. He has some of the best lines out there, and he delivers them all with this real Phil Hartman-like quality. It's perfect. I don't think this episode would have worked without him, honestly. Of course, it was all a dream, and then this episode just kind of ends. Once again, another episode with a pretty boring ending, unfortunately. My Old House starts off goofy and dumb. A whole lot of cheese, almost reminiscent of Goosebumps. But here's the thing, all these goofy and dumb things perpetuate throughout this episode and slowly mutates into something weird and strange. Let me show you real quick. You see, this episode centers around a family moving into a new home, and the main character is upset because she misses the old house. And that's it. That is the whole storyline for this episode. I am not kidding. But the beauty lies in the simplicity of it all. You see, our main character starts off being really overdramatic, and yet understandable. Moving is hard on kids. However, as the episode continues, she grows more and more dramatic about missing the old house. And it's goofy, but it slowly starts to become weird and kind of disturbing, all accumulating at the end where she breaks into her old house and very creepily starts talking to it. Eventually coming to and realizing that she needs to move on. And then the house turns out to be alive. And I can't lie, I love this shot right here. It's not amazing CGI or anything, but for a TV show, and at least comparatively to a majority of the other episodes, this looks great. But yeah, she ends up dying. And the funniest part is that in the last minute of the episode, a completely new family moves into the house, and they all die too. Like, it's so unnecessary, but I love it. Also, now that we're getting up here in the ranks, you'll start to see a good amount of episodes just have like everyone die at the very end. Like, straight up, the Hub channel doesn't fuck around. Ghostly Stare is heavy on the atmosphere. I mean, almost the whole episode takes place in a graveyard at night. But this episode revolves around a brother and sister who end up in a graveyard because the sister likes to do the wax tracings on the tombstones. Fucking nerd! I'm just kidding. This stuff is actually really fun to do. I remember in 3rd grade, we took a field trip to a graveyard to do the wax paintings or whatever, and it was fun, don't get me wrong, but it was just like, can we just go to like the zoo or something like that? But I mean, I guess that's public schooling for you. But besides the point, the brother ends up falling into an open grave and a ghost possesses his body, or rather, he possesses like a proxy of his body. Cause like the brother is still trapped down there, but this ghost is just walking around like he is the brother. It doesn't matter, cause now basically the sister has to go get her brother out before daylight, where the ghost can have his body forever. Along the way of trying to locate the grave spot, a bunch of other ghosts offer help, but are really just trying to trick her into falling into their graves so that they can also inhabit a body. All of this is for nothing anyways, because the brother ends up climbing out all by himself. But what we get is just a fun episode with a good dynamic between siblings and ghosts. The Funhouse is a solid episode that I don't have much to say about. Well, actually, I have a lot to say about it. However, I already did a video on this exact episode a couple months back if you want to check it out. But to keep it brief, it's a really good story about kids dealing with divorce together, and it touches on things like substance abuse, anger problems, and so on and so on. However, it lacks in the horror department quite a bit, but it's still more than an enjoyable time. In Best Friends Forever, a kid wants a dog, but his mom says no. And you know what? I agree with her. The mom states the kid has had a hamster, a lizard, and a bunny, all of which died in a week. So, yeah, fuck this kid. He shouldn't have a dog. So he gets the bright idea of taking care of worms to prove his mom that he's responsible enough to have a dog, but he accidentally ends up with a zombie who he names Cheeky. And this is a pretty fun concept that takes full advantage. Granted, most of it is the standard trope trying to hide the monster from the mom shtick. But there's other fun parts, like the multiple times Cheeky tries to attack the main character with him being completely oblivious, or the main character using the zombie to scare his bully, who, by the way, isn't like the stereotypical bully. He's actually just a nerd that talks about how he's going to win the science fair. Also, in the beginning of the episode, he's dunking on the main character for being better at World of Warcraft. And I don't know, I really like that though. It's a nice change of pace. But this all accumulates at the end when Cheeky finally does turn on the main character, and it turns out the zombie wanted a human pet, bringing the whole thing full circle. This episode is bad. It has absolutely no right ranking this high. It truly doesn't deserve it. But god damn, do I love this episode so much. A Creature Stirring is without a doubt the most unhinged and baffling episode in the entire series. And the funniest part? This episode is the third episode of the first season. Technically, the second episode because the first episode was a two-parter. So what makes it so crazy? Well, listen to this. The episode starts with a family on Christmas morning. Little does anyone know, the parents are actually planning on getting a divorce. So there's an air of tension between the mom and the dad. Meanwhile, the older sister and older brother couldn't care less about Christmas. In no time, the whole family starts arguing, leaving the youngest kid sad. In a moment of desperation, he makes a wish, and oh boy, is it granted. As a little bat-winged gremlin that can spit acid starts terrorizing the house. Now, one would think they would do the whole song of dance of the kid trying to warn the others and nobody believes him until the very end, but nah, they don't do that. Within 3 minutes of this gremlin appearing on screen, the whole family sees it and are petrified. They're all also completely helpless to fight it. I mean, it's fast as hell and it can spit acid. However, they can't escape the house because it's snowed in. And then the fucking gremlin starts blowing up parts of the house. So like, they all retreat to the attic. Up there, they reminisce on past Christmases, and they reveal to their kids that they're considering getting a divorce. And it's a very emotional and mature scene. But, I mean, literally when this is happening, the gremlin is still blowing up different parts of the house. And the house is just on fire now. I mean, hell, the family even accepts the fact that they're gonna die. But via a Christmas miracle, they all manage to escape. And the house just completely burns down. I mean, they lose absolutely everything. But they're all like, hey, that doesn't matter, because we're closer than ever as a family now. Which, turns out, was what the little kid wished for the family to be closer. Real fucking roundabout way to get there, but yeah, sure dude. Let's just hope your parents have good house insurance. But if it couldn't get any crazier or any dumber, fucking Santa Claus rolls up in his goddamn pimp mobile nonetheless and reclaims his gremlin and then drives off. You know, the more I think about it, I should probably rank this one higher. I don't know what it is about Haunting Hour and Christmas episodes, not really feeling like Haunting Hour episodes, but it kind of makes me wish they made more of them, honestly. So yeah, this episode really doesn't deserve to be this high, but holy shit, man, I loved this. Spaceman is an interesting episode because I think it's the only piece of children's media where they fully show off a dead child. What? No, this isn't like a setup for a joke or anything. Like look. Yeah, there's a rotting child corpse. Pretty messed up. So in this episode, a kid moves into a new neighborhood and has trouble making friends because he is obsessed with space. He comes across this lady who gives him a space helmet, and not too shortly after wearing it, another kid seems to be communicating to the main character via the helmet. But uh-oh, how is this possible? There's no batteries in the helmet. Yada yada yada, yeah, it's a ghost. A little bit of a Norman Bates sort of ending, except the roles are reversed, as the mother just kept her son's corpse once he passed away. Ultimately, the main character is creeped out, but a friend is a friend. So he decides to stay and continue to play Spaceman. Now, I do have to note that this episode actually has two endings for some reason. The common ending that's on all the purchasable forms of Haunting Hour is the one I just said, with the main character deciding to stay. The alternative ending is apparently the main character freaking out, not wanting to have anything to do with this, and then the mother character forcing him to stay and play with her dead son. I, for the life of me, couldn't find this ending anywhere on the internet. I suppose they went with the more happier ending, I guess, to offset the overall disturbing quality. But this ending really does carry the episode, all things considered. Alien Candy takes a unique approach to an alien story that I never really considered, and I actually really like. You see, there's these two aliens disguised as humans who take a particular liking in the main character for his intellect. They end up making him eat this alien candy, they tell him he has to do it to join the club, and slowly our main character starts feeling their effects. The main one being extreme dehydration. Now, you may think you know where this story is going. I mean, already it bears a striking resemblance to the Goosebumps episode Calling All Creeps. But no, our main character isn't transforming into an alien or anything like that. Instead, these two aliens are planning on eating the main character, but first have to cleanse and purge the human of all his earthly germs that are harmful to aliens. And I can't tell you how happy I was for this story to actually take this kind of direction. Also, holy fuck, look at these aliens! They're pretty damn scary. I really like how these guys look, and better yet, the way they move is pretty creepy too. Overall, they keep the classic alien look, but elevate it enough to be effective in terms of horror, which is pretty hard to do, all things considered. They end up not being able to eat the main character because he's a redhead, and they're allergic to redheads. They didn't know this because the kid's hair was dyed brown from Halloween a couple months back. That being said, they still ended up eating a fucking toe. Yeah, no lie. This kid's pinky toe is just eaten. But after that, the aliens just turn towards his friend, and they end up handling business. The aliens are also defeated with salts, so I guess they're more like slugs than anything else. The cast famously features Raleigh as the main character, so this show officially has two of the most prominent characters in Diary of a Wimpy Kid, so good job. But this episode has some really good body horror despite not being overtly explicit with what it shows. Basically, the main character, Raleigh, tries to hang with the delinquent kids, who plan on egging some crazy lady's house. He ends up getting caught and hurt in the process, so what does he do? He rats out the other kids and completely alters the narrative to make him look like some sort of good Samaritan. And you know what they say, snitches get stitches. No, quite literally, look, Riley ends up in a cast because of his injuries, and the other boys are stuck doing community service. He also gets the praise of the local police force and becomes an honorary rent-a-cop. However, throughout the entire episode, something is up with that cast. It's itchy, but it keeps getting worse. We see plenty of movement underneath the cast, and soon enough, it's readily apparent that there are rats underneath that cast. And this is just an episode that will make you feel uncomfortable. You'll definitely be scratching your own arm when you watch this. And it really does do a good job of slowly building up that sort of dread and uncomfortableness. Even the ending, when Riley finally snaps and saws off the cast. The mom tells one of the officers that when he found him, even once the cast was off, he still kept sawing. Of course, this is all spoken, not shown, but it leaves it up to our own imagination, and it's the perfect visual to close out an episode with. I can't recall if I said this in the Are You Afraid of the Dark ranking video, but I'm not particularly scared of clowns. I get the fear, but they just don't do anything for me. So the fact that Afraid of Clowns ranks this highly should be a testament to its quality. This episode revolves around a kid who, you guessed it, is afraid of clowns. However, leading up to his 13th birthday, he gets fucking gang stalked by a bunch of them. I mean, they roll up on his ass complete with a clown car and everything. It's actually kind of hilarious. So of course he's acting weird and paranoid, something his parents take note of, and his father thinks it's puberty, so he tries to talk about puberty with his son, on multiple occasions throughout the episode even, and it's hilariously awkward and almost a little too real. However, those scenes take on a completely different context once we get to the ending, as the main character ends up getting roped along to a carnival show because he has a crush on a girl. He gets selected from the audience to participate in the show, completely against his will. On stage, he is transformed into a clown. Stumbling backstage, he finds out that the makeup doesn't come off, and that's when, and listen to this, that's when his parents come out of nowhere and are like, yeah, we're clowns, and you're a clown. Get used to it. It's such a dumb ending, but I really like it. Imagine being scared of something only to learn that you are the thing that you fear, and that there's truly no escape. But I think this episode really excels when it comes to the visuals. The lighting is fun and dynamic, there's a lot of kinetic movement to the characters and the camera. Also, this episode does the whole cake or fake thing in a dream sequence way before it's ever popular. Overall, just a really fun and decently scary episode. Scary Mary is yet again just haunting hour, taking a classic urban legend and contextualizing it in a modern setting. In this case, it's taking the classic Bloody Mary story. It's also a two-parter, which is notable for one major reason. You see, part 1 plays out in a very standard way. A group of kids talk about Bloody Mary, I mean Scary Mary. But yeah, it's just them talking about Scary Mary, going over the whole myth, and they even end up performing the ritual. Scary things happen here and there, and our main character ends up trapped in some sort of mirror dimension. And it's fine, it's completely standard, it's nothing egregious or nothing really that great. If this was the only episode, it'd probably be somewhere in the middle of the ranking. However, part 2 dials it up, because now we get to see inside the mirror dimension, and it's fucking creepy. Scary Mary and all her past victims live in this world and are forced to wear these eerie looking masks, as Mary keeps all their faces in a chest for her to wear at will. And in the climax, finally getting to see a quick glimpse of Mary, it's really terrifying and effective. I really want to rank this higher because part 2 is just that good. However, part 1 really is nothing special. This episode could have easily broken the top 10, but unfortunately, has to sit right outside the top 20. Sick perfectly encapsulates what it's like to feel, well, sick. The constant coughing, the runny, itchy, irritated nose, slipping in and out of awake and sleeping, just the overall amount of gunk and mucus in your body. And this episode even captures this feeling of being sick as a kid perfectly, as the main character ends up watching boring daytime television, which is really just a rite of passage of being sick as a kid. And I gotta say, this episode really did hit different when I first watched it, because I watched all of Haunting Hour over the course of 5 days, and for all 5 of those days, I was deathly sick. Like, the sickest I've ever been in my entire life. So when the house itself in the episode ends up getting sick, complete with pools of sweat on the wall and snot all over the place, brother, I've never felt more seen. But as it turns out, the house isn't getting sick, and these people aren't quarantining the place because of the kid. Turns out there's an alien coincidentally loose in the house, and the people in hazmat suits are planning on just pumping poisonous gas in to kill the alien, even though they know the kid's in there. They just consider it collateral damage. They even tell the mom, and she ends up breaking down outside. However, they do the whole "it was just a dream" ending, which is a giant cop-out, but the rest of the episode is still really good. I already talked about how fantasy horror isn't really my cup of tea, so it's quite shocking that a two-parter fantasy episode cracked my top 20, but I think that speaks volumes to the sheer quality in this episode. But I also think that has to do with the fact that there's not a drop of horror in this entire episode, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's like one part in the woods, but outside of that, yeah, this is really just a fantasy episode. Which also means the production design team isn't constrained to the suburbs, meaning they can make some of the best costumes, props, set designs, and set decorations in the entire series. No, really, I think this episode from production design level is the best in the entire show. As far as the story, it's actually pretty good. Two kids work under a sorcerer. Well, the boy's an apprentice wanting to learn magic, and the girl, well, she's a slave. So, yeah. But the sorcerer is a complete dickhead who won't free the girl or even teach the boy magic. So the two seek out help from the sorcerer's ex-apprentice, who promises the two that if they help kill the evil sorcerer, she will in fact free the girl and teach the boy magic. So they do that, but she doesn't free the girl or teach the boy magic. So they end up taking her down, and that's that. Nothing crazy plot-wise, all things considered, but it's just done very well. This one's gonna be real short. Swarmer Norman is about a boy named Norman who finds out he can control bugs. So he swarms his bullies with them, but his ego gets a little too big, so the bugs turn on him. And that's really it for this episode. Yeah, not too much happens here. It's really short and simple, yet effective. This is probably totally a biased thing. I'm not scared of bugs per se, but a big pile of them, it just does something to me. And I just don't like it. But that's exactly why I like this episode. Grampire sounds like it would suck. A society of old people vampires? That ain't scary, and it sounds like an excuse to make fun of some old people. Which, to be fair, I'm all for making fun of old people. And while we do get a lot of old people jokes, I really liked them. They were less juvenile and more wholesome and cute for some reason. Like this old lady stopping her pursuit when she realizes that there's a sale going on. I really like that joke. Or how the grandpa calls this one old lady vampire young because she's only like 250 years old. But the simple premise of the episode is that these two grandkids visit their grandpa who, to no surprise, is a vampire. But also that the entire neighborhood he lives in is for old vampires. Quickly, the community realizes that there is fresh blood in town and start going after his grandkids. And that's really all there is to it. But what we end up getting is just a really fun adventure, as the granddaughter ends up getting kidnapped, forcing these two to go save her. And really, it's just these two kicking ass in a handful of fun and unique locales. Like the supermarket is a perfect example. It appears like a normal supermarket, but slowly as they travel deeper into it, all the goods are some sort of vampire products. I mean, most prominently, blood. I really love these free samples of blood in particular. Or in the very end, we find out that they are giving away the granddaughter as a prize at bingo. And they present her like she's a bottle of vintage wine. It's really good stuff. But for our climax, we end up getting a really dramatic, intense game of bingo. Fucking bingo. And I absolutely love it. And it's also surprisingly effective. Of course, they end up getting her back and pretty much nuking the entire place. Oh yeah, did I also mention this is a two-parter? Because yeah, this episode is 2 parts and yet somehow still remains fun throughout. The pace never really slows down. If anything, it only ramps up. And I applaud them for not only having a fun adventure kind of episode, but for it being 2 parts as well. That's kind of hard to do. Dreamcatcher is the only episode that takes place at a summer camp. I only point this out because this kind of setting was pretty common for Goosebumps, or at least for the books. But if I could simplify the story just a little bit, it's basically Nightmare on Elm Street, but with this guy who is half man, half spider, who invades the camper's dreams, and Jesus Christ. This is terrifying. And that's really all there is to this episode. It's a rather simple plot executed rather well, with a good cast of characters and some of the most unsettling designs and scenarios. I mean, the ending just has this bully character straight up die to this thing. Really You is the only episode of Haunting Hour I watched as a kid, and it fucked me up back then. And I'm glad to say it still kinda fucked me up now. It's a doll episode, a R.L. Stine specialty. It's also yet again another two-parter, notable this time around because of how they utilize the extra length in a rather clever way. You see, part 1 is just the standard doll story. Kid gets a doll, the doll comes alive, but nobody believes the kid, and the doll starts causing havoc that the main character is blamed for. It's nothing special. In fact, it kind of just goes through the motions. Although, I will say, it's done rather well. Meanwhile, in part 2, we are introduced to a completely new aspect of the story, and that's how slowly the main character is turning into the doll, while the doll is slowly turning into the main character. And I do mean slowly. This episode really has some great body horror sequences because of that. Part 2 is also where the other characters visit this creepy old doll maker looking for answers, and just all these scenes are spectacular. So essentially, you got an episode with the classic doll stuff, but then you also got something completely new. This is kind of why I don't like the sequel episode, because it's just the standard doll stuff from part 1 while also not providing anything new. Oh yeah, and like love changes them back and the day is saved. Overall, great episode that is truly elevated in the second half. As a closeted musical fan who will never admit they like musicals, I love stage fright. The whole episode sees a school putting on a stage production of Hansel and Gretel, which from my understanding is a real musical, but at the same time the episode seemingly creates its own music for it. I don't know. I watched 76 episodes from this series. I'm sorry if my research ain't the best. But that being said, the music in the episode is actually really good. I kind of wish they did a few more songs. I mean, at least give us some sort of ballad. But slowly the stars of the show start disappearing, making the overall production a complete shit show. And this episode is loaded with jokes and scenarios that probably hit a little too close to my fellow theater friends. But this all accumulates at the end when it turns out that a witch has been sabotaging the show, because she doesn't particularly like her portrayal in the show. So she locks the theater doors and presumably kills not just everyone on stage, but everybody in the audience as well. I really wasn't joking when I said they tend to kill off all the characters at the end of some of these episodes. But we are left with an episode that is not only fun and mysterious, it also has some good songs to boot. This might be my most controversial ranking here. I can already sense some comments saying that I placed this one way too high. But hey, you already watched an hour of this video. You might as well watch a couple more minutes to hear me out. And then you can leave your mean comment. Near mid-condition sees our main character buying a rare discontinued doll from the 80s, rumored to be discontinued because it was linked to several deaths back in the day. And, well, yeah, it's a killer plushie. That's really all there is to it, but you know what? This episode completely knows what it is. It's very tongue-in-cheek. It knows it's cheesy, and in fact heavily leans into that cheese. The dialogue is fast and snappy, and also pretty funny too. And what we are ultimately left with is just another stupid fun episode that knows it's stupid and fun. And that's all I can really ask for. Also, low-key got Five Nights at Freddy's vibes, I don't know what that means. Lights Out is a great episode. It starts with a group of kids watching a paranormal investigation show and commenting on the fact that it's so fake and that they could do better, so they do just that. They end up going to an abandoned hospital to try to make their own show, and it's so funny because, yeah, they're trying to fake this thing. Sometimes they open a door a little too soon and have to redo the shot, or sometimes one of the kids messes up and ends up in a shot where he's not supposed to be in. It's great. Now, I may have not grown up watching Ghost Adventures or anything like that, but me and my friends growing up, we absolutely loved The Othersiders. It only had like 2 seasons on Cartoon Network and it sucked, but that didn't matter. Of course, actual scary shit happens to them and it's done really well. It almost has a Blair Witch-like quality to it, if I'm being honest. But the whole thing ends by doing a full circle, with a new group of kids watching what we just watched and saying that they could do better. It's just simply beautiful. Return of the Pumpkinheads is a sequel episode of which I have not talked about the original episode yet. So I'll try to keep this brief. Now, that being said, the first episode is really good. Clearly, I haven't ranked it yet, so worse than great is still good. But it really does feel like sloppy seconds. This episode can in fact completely stand on its own, as there really isn't a connection to the first episode. So in essence, it's good, it's just been done better, and you'll soon see what I mean. This episode sets the tone right away with the opening scene. Wrong Number is funny, self-aware, satirical, and over the top in the best way possible. It's basically if Mean Girls was a horror movie, essentially. And I absolutely love it. I know I said this about plenty of episodes in the series before, but this is the absolute funniest episode. It's basically 2 popular Valley Girl archetypes stumbling around a bunch of scary shit. Like, at the start, their old next door neighbor complains about them being too loud, so they prank call her like 3 times in a row. The next morning, she fucking dies, and medical services come to retrieve the dead body. And guess what? Instead of feeling bad, the main girl's like, damn, that medical guy's pretty hot, and then proceeds to ask for his number in front of the dead body. And it is this tone that is kept throughout the entire episode. It knows what it is and fully capitalizes on it. As far as the horror elements go, it's probably the only downside. Basically, the old dead lady is haunting them with phone calls and texts and like spiders. I don't know. Until eventually her ghost fully comes into the picture to trap the main girl into the phone. Its horror elements is nothing crazy, but it's more than serviceable, I suppose. But with writing this consistent and good, it just cracked my top 10. The Perfect Brother is a story between 2 brothers. I know, who could have guessed? There's one slightly above average brother and one, well, perfect brother. Slowly, the perfect brother starts underperforming in school, and by that I mean he gets straight A's and 1 A-. But the parents start acting weird and end up taking him to the hospital. Except the average brother finds out it's not a hospital. It's a whole ass facility, and this facility is fantastic. Some of the most sterile, cold, and creepy visuals come from this one setting. Seeing the different subjects vacantly being tested on is great. But outside of the fantastic visuals, the heart of the episode is the relationship between 2 brothers. And unlike, say, My Imaginary Friend, the perfect brother gives proper attention and focus onto the sibling relationship. And we truly feel like these are genuine brothers who are there for each other. Eventually, they find each other where it turns out that the perfect brother is just a robot, and his underperformance is due to him being outdated, so the facility is just going to scrap him and replace him. Even upon learning that his brother is a robot, the average brother still says he loves him, and it's a truly emotional scene. Doubly impactful due to the fact that, he's unable to save him. And when he returns home, the replacement brother is already in their house. But the average brother refuses to recognize him as his true brother. And as we the audience are still dealing with the heartbreak, the show reveals the big twist. Turns out the whole family are robots, and the average son is the only human. And the only reason why the family had him in the first place was so that he could do all the mundane tasks around the house, like doing dishes, laundry, or mowing the lawn. But he's been too much of a pain, so they ship him off. And the episode ends. It's such a good twist that I think truly blindsided me. Not only did this kid lose his brother, but he also lost his family. I mean, to be fair, their parents weren't that great to begin with, but still. Catching Cold is a great episode that I just so happened to talk about in a video. So it's the same video where I talk about the Funhouse episode. I talk about both episodes in that video. If you want to check it out, I mean, it's up to you. But to keep it brief, it's a genuinely chilling story about addiction with some great visuals and a truly disturbing ending. Plus, it's got Rowley in it again. So, it's a good time all around. Spores is the second to last episode of the series, and it's an infamous season 4 episode, which, yeah, that season didn't really have the best track record. So I'm delighted to say that Spores is a great episode, and with a really simple plot nonetheless. Basically, a family goes hiking in the woods. Suddenly, the mom disappears and the dad starts acting strange. And it's really the uneasy, tension-filled atmosphere that slowly ramps up throughout the episode that is truly palpable. It's fantastic, and while we the audience may know what's going on, it was still great waiting for the other shoe to drop. As far as what's truly going on, it's literally the premise of Last of Us. I am not kidding. There's a whole scene where the main kid talks about cordyceps and how they only infect insects and shouldn't affect humans, but the spores have started infecting humans somehow. And it is this ending with these fungus people that is truly terrifying. I can't help but feel itchy looking at this stuff. It really is some of the best body horror in the entire show. Also, once again, keeping up with tradition, everybody dies at the end of this episode. The mom, the dad, the older brother and sister, and the little kid at the end gets blasted with a face full of spores. So, Haunting Hour is truly taking no prisoners. This is yet again another entry I have to defend a little bit, because I really love this episode, but I feel like any fan of the show wouldn't rank this one nearly as high as I did. So, just hear me out. Creature Feature is a fantastic 2-part episode, because just like all the best 2-parters before it, it perfectly utilizes the extra length to tell a better story. The plot line revolves around this kid getting sucked into a 1950s B-movie, while these other two kids sit back and watch. And really, it's got a lot of humor in a rather unexpected way that I truly love. You see, as the main character is going through the movie, these two are stuck back and provide commentary. So in a sort of way, it becomes like an episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000. And I was smiling ear to ear throughout the entire duration. However, part 2 is totally different. If part 1 was just this funny little goofy riff on B-movies, then part 2 is just fucked up. You see, in part 2, the kid ends up escaping the movie. However, he starts slowly turning into a tick. And when I say slowly, I mean it's literally like the sequences in the Jeff Goldblum The Fly. Of course, not as graphic as the film, but pretty damn close, all things considered. And so the kid becomes a giant tick monster and starts terrorizing the town. And this is just brilliant, because essentially what the episode is doing is taking the thing that we were laughing at in the first part and making it truly terrifying and gross. I absolutely love the tonal shift and the play on the audience perception. Oh, and part 2 still doesn't lose its humor. It's still perfectly integrated throughout. Creature Feature is fantastic, and I think probably the most underrated episode in the entire series. The Walls is one of those early season 1 episodes that lets you know this show is going to be something truly special because, goddamn dude. This is one of the most unsettling episodes, but above all else, I think it's also without doubt the grossest episode. And it really all comes down to this creature design. This is fucking fantastic in the worst way possible. I mean, just, ew, he's so slimy. But maybe I should back up real quick. What is the plot of this episode? Well, it's about a family moving into a new home, and quickly our main character starts hearing things in the walls. After he talks to some neighborhood kid the next day, he learns that the person that used to live in the house was found dead. Apparently, the old tenant would be seen bringing home bags upon bags of sugar home with him, constantly saying that he needs to feed the walls. Later that night, our main character faces the creature stating that he needs to feed him sugar or he'll kill his parents. So the kid does just that, but realizes this is unsustainable and starts losing his mind, eventually deciding to go into the walls himself to kill the creature, and he almost does, but his parents save the creature at the last second. Apparently, the parents knew about the creature all along, actually bought the house specifically because of the creature, because apparently this creature grants good luck. It's a little bit of a goofy ending, that's for sure, but I love the implications that the parents were willing to keep their kid in the dark about this horrifying thing for the sake of their own benefit. It asks the question of who is the bigger monster in the end, and who do you feel safe with if the people meant to keep you safe aren't doing that. But once again, props to this creature design. I also love that we really only get to see bits and pieces of him, and before we even get a glimpse, we just hear noises. This episode does a really good job of ramping things up, and I love it. Pumpkinhead is hailed as one of Haunting Hour's all-time classic episodes, and for good reason. The episode starts on a pretty eerie note, as we open on a family getting ready for Halloween. However, Halloween is looking a bit different this time around, as 1 year ago, a bunch of kids went missing on Halloween, and the whole town is cautious. Most residents aren't decorating, pumpkin patches aren't selling pumpkins, and trick-or-treating has been cancelled. Instead, the local school has opted to host their very own trick-or-treating event within the school itself. It's a rather foreboding way to start the episode, with a town trying to heal from its wounds placed previously. And from there, it only gets worse, as the main trio decides that they want real pumpkins, so they sneak into a pumpkin patch that's closed off. Also, it just so happens to be the same place where the kids went missing. From there, they find the pumpkin heads, and these things are truly terrifying. The farmer catches them and gets mad, and the kids run off, stealing some pumpkins in the process. Later that night, one of the kids gets kidnapped by these pumpkin heads, while the other two deduce that he's at the farm. The youngest stays in the car, while the older one goes in and looks. And it really does feel like the beginning of the end, a helpless scenario that they had no way of overcoming, and a fate they ultimately sealed for themselves. Yeah, this is yet again another scenario where everybody dies at the end. It's also one you truly feel bad for, because all three of these siblings have such great chemistry between one another. And the fact that this episode doesn't even give them so much as a glimpse of being able to overcome these monsters is just soul-crushing. We also find out that the souls of the people the Pumpkinheads kill go into these actual pumpkins. And this is such a striking and uncanny visual, I absolutely love it. From start to finish, this is an episode that progressively gets scarier and scarier, something the sequel episode just didn't do, or have as good as characters as this episode did. Once again, it just feels like sloppy seconds, but this episode truly is a Haunting Hour classic. This is the one everybody's probably been waiting for, and for good reason. Mascot probably has one of the most striking and iconic monsters in the entirety of the show. I mean, look at this fucking thing. But beyond that, what we are given is a rather simplistic plot executed perfectly to make one of the best episodes. Plain and simple, this school's mascot is ugly, so these two kids decide to change it. However, this also requires firing the person who is currently the mascot. But the problem is, nobody knows who's under the suit, and the air of mystery only slowly builds from there the more they attempt to talk to this thing. They eventually hold trials for new mascots, with the wolf guy winning it, but the next day he's nowhere to be found. And then after that, one of the two kids goes to confront the mascot, only to find out that there's nobody in the costume. A twist that is rather obvious and you can see coming from a mile away. However, as I said earlier, it is done beautifully. After that, the kid goes missing, and at the basketball game, the other character tries to call his cell phone. However, the ringing is coming from inside the mascot. It is revealed that not only has the kid been eaten, but so was the other guy who won the tryouts. Which is a little unfair. I mean, I know the guy was gunning for his job, but all he did was some light breakdancing. He really didn't deserve this. But this is truly some of the most shocking visuals in the show, revealing that the inside of this mascot is grotesquely real, with flesh and a slime-like substance, all while creating a horrifically claustrophobic space for these two poor bastards. It's fantastic. Flight snuck up on me. Not like I expected this episode to be bad or anything, but I definitely didn't expect this episode to be so mature and emotional with its story. This episode is truly the most poignant with its subject matter, in a way that shocked me. They cover heavy themes that are hard to express, let alone in a show for children. And if I watched this episode not knowing it's from Haunting Hour, I wouldn't even have known it was from a children's show. What's even crazier to me is that this episode isn't scary, at least in the traditional sense, because ultimately this episode is a discussion about death. You see, this episode centers around a kid flying alone on a plane to visit his estranged dad. Since his parents divorced, he doesn't like spending time with his dad. He ends up sitting next to this man who seems annoyed to be flying next to a kid, but humors him by engaging in conversation. They overhear two people talking, saying that they are transporting a dead body via the cargo hold. Meanwhile, the man has trouble waving down a flight attendant. An old lady ends up boarding the plane, and the man in particular has a bad feeling about her. Through a bunch of vision flashes, it is revealed that the old lady is the Grim Reaper. And before you can even predict it, it's revealed that the man in the plane is in fact a ghost. He is the dead body in the cargo hold, and only the kid and the Grim Reaper can see him. Once again, another instance where I thought they were going to draw this out and have it be some big revelation at the end, but no. By the time you figure it out, the show reveals the truth. There's a hauntingly beautiful moment where the man remembers how he died. It was a car crash. The camera slowly pushes in on his face as you see lights and hear sounds indicative of the accident. It's a simplistic, chilling way to do this monologue, and some of the best direction in the entire series. The rest of the episode is just a man going through the 5 stages of grief, with a kid trying to console him along the way. Eventually, his restless spirit starts making the plane go down. Attempting to fix the problem, the kid asks the Grim Reaper to take him away, and she just tells him that he has to come to the decision on his own. And then what we get is one of the most profound, moving, and emotional conversations. The two get into the whole philosophy of living and dying, and the man stating that he has so many regrets, saying how he pushed people away because he wrongfully assumed he was never wanted. The kid is able to relate this to his own predicament. Since the divorce, he's been pushing his dad away because he thinks his dad is wanting to spend time with him out of pity almost. They both learn a lesson on being vulnerable and accept the time they will never get back. The man's still unwilling to die, the kid proclaims that it's okay to pass on. The two go back and forth for a bit in one very profound exchange of dialogue, and then the man approaches the Grim Reaper, ready to move on, and he finally enters the light. The plane stabilizes and they're able to land. The boy talks to the Grim Reaper one time, thanking her for bringing the two together, as they both learn valuable lessons. He tells her later, and she responds by saying, "Without a doubt," cementing the idea that death is inevitable. This episode is a tight 20 minutes, with some of the most introspective discussions surrounding death and life that I have ever seen in a kids program. It's beautiful, it's a masterpiece, and it just barely fell short of my number one. Scarecrow is the best episode of Haunting Hour because of a number of reasons, but the main one being the ending. No hyperbole, this is the best ending in the entire series, and honestly, it's not even close. But this episode also has the best antagonist. He's not a monster or over the top or cartoony. He's simply a chilling, calculated, mysterious man who may not be in the episode that much, but his presence is constantly felt. His ideas permeate throughout. An overall helpless sense of dread looms over this episode, one that not only doesn't go away, but grows larger and larger. One that can't help but be felt long after the episode finally finishes. The story starts off innocent enough, with an older brother and younger sister just living life on a farm. A normal, mundane visit to the general store ends up changing their lives forever as he walks in. A man with no name dressed in all black talks about the end of the world, questioning why people worry so much as he believes it would be peaceful, as everything would be totally silent. Before he leaves, he proclaims that the modern world is too noisy. Later on, the man runs into the little sister and offers to sell her a scarecrow. Seeing as she was having trouble with the crops and birds, she takes him up on the deal. The next morning, the crops are perfectly fine, not a bird in sight, and yet, things are eerily quiet. Even worse, all the cattle are gone too. The scarecrow just standing still. The older brother calls his girlfriend, explains everything. Suddenly, the girl starts freaking out, saying, "It feels like everything is there, and everything is nothing," ending by saying she knows it is coming, before seeing a scarecrow above the entire small town. The call ends there. They try to tell their parents, but they're missing. The house is morbidly quiet. Deciding to go into town, upon arriving, it is frighteningly silent. Remnants of life once lived laid about. Suddenly, the mysterious man can be spotted driving to the farmhouse. So the brother calls his sister, warning her of an incoming peril, telling her to go inside and lock the door. She does just that, but discovers a trail of straw, and when she turns to leave, she is confronted by a scarecrow. She begins to cry silently. When the brother arrives home, he is confronted with a mysterious man, who proceeds to deliver one of the most chilling and terrifying monologues, all backed by complete, unsettling silence. He talks about the end of the world and how he needed at least somebody by his side to witness how perfectly quiet it is. We then end on a shot of two scarecrows, one wearing the attire of the older brother and the other of the mysterious man. And after all is said and done, I sat there, sitting in my bedroom, in complete silence. And it was beautiful. With Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark, and now Haunting Hour finally getting ranking episodes, it kind of begs the question, what should I rank next? I'll let you guys discuss in the comments down below, and hey, whichever one gets the most likes, I'll probably end up doing it. But other than that, as always, thanks for watching.